Welcome back to the Nichols and Dimez Show, everybody. I'm your host, Chris Nichols. It's been a little bit since I've done a solo episode, so I wanted to try something new for this solo podcast, and I plan to do more of these going forward, but this is basically a book review, my version of one, from a recent book that I finished called The Power of One More by Ed Mylett. And I'm going to share 3 key takeaways I got from the book just because I felt it was super impactful and very much related to what I talk about a lot on my podcast and valuable for the listeners. So first off, who is Ed Mylett? Ed Mylett is a very successful entrepreneur. He's a podcast host. He's one of the most sought after speakers in the world. And he's been a huge influence to me in my entrepreneurial journey and how I've structured and built out the Nichols and Dimez Show podcast. Ed started his career in the finance industry, where he was able to build a lot of wealth, and he got into investing and real estate, and then he eventually transitioned into the personal development space full time. I am a religious listener of his podcast, The Ed Mylett Show, and like I said, it's been a huge influence on my podcast. So The Power of One More really focuses on this idea of going one more, or doing the extra mile, or doing one more than you think that you're supposed to do. That could be one more rep in the gym. It could be one more phone call in your sales job, whatever that might apply to. Every chapter uses this terminology in some way, these words, one more. So the first chapter that I really felt was powerful was chapter 2, called One More and Living in Your Matrix. Now, this chapter focuses a lot on the concept around your reticular activating system, which is a tool in your brain that filters in what is important to you and what is not. Your RAS is basically a filter that reveals what is important to you in your life. It filters in what's important and it blocks out what's not important. This RAS concept I found was such a powerful thing because it gives you the ability to become way more effective at approaching any sort of goal or accomplishment you're looking to get done. And what it essentially does is it makes you hyper-focus on this one thing so that you can become way more effective at it. Now, the reason why he uses the term matrix in the chapter of this book is because he relates it to the movie, The Matrix, specifically the concept around bullet time, which is what they call the very famous visual in the film when you have Neo or these other people getting shot at with all these different bullets, and the bullets then just slow down in real time so that Neo is able to maneuver and bend over backwards to dodge all of these bullets coming at him. I think it's a really cool comparison to think about how this can apply to anything that you're looking to accomplish. Let's take an example. Let's say you decide that you want to purchase a Tesla. You might not have thought much about it before you made this decision, but now you're hyper-focused on making this happen. How are you going to buy this thing? When are you going to get it? You're doing your research every day. You're constantly looking at different Teslas. You're thinking about it when you go to bed at night. You're dreaming about it. You wake up. You're motivated to go get this done. You're going to then realize that when you walk outside, you're going to see a shit ton of Teslas all over the place. And it's not that they weren't there before. They were always there. But your RAS has been activated to focus on Teslas because that is a key focus and a priority to you at this point. Funny enough, I actually experienced this recently when I started shaving my head. It had been something that I had been thinking about doing for years and I'd been putting off. And finally, once I did it, I walked outside and all of a sudden I see all these bald guys walking around. I was like, where the hell did all these guys come from? But they were always there. But my RAS was activated at the time I decided to change that look. And you can apply this idea to a level of fitness that you are seeking, or a type of relationship that you want in a romantic partner, or in a friendship, or in a business partnership. What happens when you slow things down in this area that you're trying to focus on with your RAS being activated is it allows your senses and your brain to reset. You have a clear approach to how you want to effectively approach this thing. You'll also start to see way more opportunities in this thing because everything has slowed down. It's not rushing by you and you're just missing all the opportunity that is a part of this thing, even though all of these things are always there. An interesting comparison to this idea is when I go to breath work. I do breath work up in Encinitas with a good friend of mine, Taiha, who was one of the first guests on this podcast. But I go in there and I approach it with the mindset of, okay, I'm excited to see what I'm going to learn today. Even though no one is telling me anything, I'm not reading any book, I'm not listening to any podcast, there's no information coming my way. But I know that I'm going to reveal answers that are already within me because I'm manipulating in a much more effective way how I'm using my mind. So how do you activate your RAS? Well, the answer is repeated visualization and thought. Go back to the Tesla example. If you decide you want to buy one, you're doing your research all day, you're going to bed thinking about it, it becomes a repeated visual and thought in your head. When this RAS is activated, it's going to help you see what you want to see and then influence your actions. Now, if you zoom out to a more macro perspective on the reticular activating system, what you're going to find is that if you intentionally place very positive and high-level thoughts to where your RAS is, you're going to see that your fear and anxiety is going to be replaced with confidence and forward momentum. So I thought the RAS is a very powerful tool that you have the ability to activate whenever you want, as long as you practice it and think about it this way. And taking the bullet time visual from the Matrix is a great way to think about this in general. All right, takeaway number 2 is from chapter 10, which is called One More Higher Standard. I love this one because it talks about the linkage between standards and goals, and it also defines the difference between the two. Well, the difference between goals and standards is that goals start as thoughts. Your brain will then confirm that it's a goal, or it will just let it pass through because either you don't care enough about it, or you decide that it's unachievable and not worth it for you. Once you decide on a goal, you then will create standards to apply actions to these thoughts. It's a little bit more comparable to habits. Your goals will then become byproducts of how you approach your standards. One question you need to ask yourself is, are you willing to tolerate these standards? If not, then your goals will become irrelevant. Let's take an example of adjusting your standards that you may or may not tolerate. Let's say you decide that you need to make 100 sales calls a day in order to do 200% of your quota. But 100 calls a day will require that you're in the office early in the morning, you're leaving late at night, and then you will have to give up multiple workouts per week. That's something that I'm probably am not willing to do because my workouts are so important to my well-being and overall happiness. That's an example of a standard that I probably would not tolerate. But you might get into some opposing arguments with that particular example because perhaps you're more effective in your time of work when you're staying on top of your fitness. And your 60 calls will actually be more effective than your 100 calls. But back to the point, another big factor to consider here is that people around you might start to undermine your standards. They won't take you seriously. And so this is a big thing that I've learned, especially as I've gotten into doing my podcast and starting my business. I just don't have as much room in my life for fuckery. So I do not have the tolerance for poor treatment from individuals around me. And certain relationships have been adjusted because of that. You need to hold your standards on what you're worthy of and the treatment and the respect that you deserve with this level of life that you're living. Your standards need to be consistent with your self-worth. Now, a really cool part from this chapter was Ed listed how do you create these higher standards? He listed like 9 of them, and I wanted to share 3 of them that I really resonated with. Number 1, you have to understand your why. If you know your why at all times, you will naturally be motivated at a different level to reach these goals. If you're in the situation where you're just doing something to do it, then you need to reevaluate and dig deeper so that you can be more effective and more focused, more motivated in what you're doing, and of course, more disciplined. Another one is to forget perfection. This is something that I've traditionally struggled with in my life. I like to make sure things are really good before I put something out there. Since putting my voice out with this podcast, I've improved a lot in this area of going with it and seeing how it turns out and not freaking out if something's not perfect. And this is very much related to the third one I took away, which is don't overthink it. You will find yourself paralyzed if you overthink something and just never start. Inaction is the worst enemy of all. If you try something and you screw up, that's a whole lot better than doing nothing at all. Think about how you'll feel at the end of your life. How depressing would that be to say, wow, I had one shot at life and I didn't try this thing. No one's going to give a shit if you failed anyway at that point, and you certainly won't either. One thing Ed mentions is to be very careful about comparing yourself to others. This is a very unhealthy practice, and that the only comparing you should be doing is to yourself. This is the journey of personal development, making sure that you're a better person today than you were yesterday. Okay, takeaway number 3 was a more personal one that I felt compelled to talk about. And this comes from chapter 18, which is called One More Prayer. Now, probably a lot of people doing a book review on this to give out tactical, actionable skills maybe wouldn't pick this one because there's a lot of stuff in this book about one more goal, one more try, one more dream, one more in your matrix, right? All these things we've talked about, one more habit. But this one spoke to me in a different kind of way because the way Ed talks about his faith and how he leverages prayer in his life was very on point with how I have always approached these things in my life. And just to start off with what faith is, faith has been the single most dominant driving force in man's search for spiritual peace and truth in all of history. Ed approaches this chapter not to push a religion or faith on anybody. He starts off by saying, I respect what your faith is, and the point of this chapter is to use prayer and faith as a strategy to help achieve your goals. When you look at faith and prayer properly in your life, you're trusting that these things are intended to cultivate good in you. Praying to God every day has been a key part of my life and routine for many years. Because of faith and prayer, I am never alone. I make sure that I'm praying no matter how good life is or how bad life is. It creates a sense of equanimity in my life, which is so beneficial. And it reminds me of something my grandfather told me when I was a kid, which was, Chris, never get too high and never get too low. And how do I apply that to my prayers? Well, I always make sure to thank God first. I show gratitude no matter what's going on. And then if I have things to ask for, which I usually do, just like all of us, I ask for things. I really like what Ed said about what is this faith and prayer time used for? It's so that you can search for inner peace, reflect on the nature of your life, and practice gratitude for your gifts. Another point from this chapter is to live a full life, you must suspend the necessity of needing to know everything before you act. This goes back to two of the points I made from the previous takeaway around forgetting perfection and not overthinking it. Another big thing that Ed gets into from this chapter that I thought was extremely powerful was the linkage between faith, energy, and quantum science. It turns out that there's a lot of people out there who feel like they have to pick one of these things or one of these camps to be a part of. If you are a science person, then that must contradict any sort of faith or this energy. If you're a faith person, then maybe you feel like you have to deny science. This isn't the case, according to Ed, and I agree with Ed completely. He claims that he is in the camp of all three. He talks about how energy and prayers feed off of each other. And ask yourself the question, why can't God be the creator of all this energy that we feel? Ed claims from firsthand experience, and I do as well, the more often you pray, and the more in touch with your faith, with energy around you that you are, the more people will feel your energy, peace, comfort, and empathy. And I'm sure we've all had some type of experience when you walk into a room and you immediately feel some sort of energy, whether it's a good feeling that you're there or it's a bad feeling and you just want to leave. The same thing can apply to a new person that you're meeting. Wow, this person has really good energy. I love being around them. I want to get to know them better. Or this person rubs me the wrong way. I don't like this. I need to remove myself from the situation. Now, the topic in this chapter of faith and prayer is a very loaded and heavy and personal topic for each one of us. So I would encourage you to get the book and read this chapter more if you want to develop your own opinions and perspective. But I think he makes some great points no matter where you stand today. Now, if you're a person of faith and you feel like you're being judged because you have a certain view, like perhaps the one I've shared today, one way that can be helpful of looking at it is to tell yourself and to put out into the world that your relationship with God is more important than what people think or assume they know about you. This is a principle that I adopted and started to really apply when I became much more in touch with my Christian faith in my high school days. Anyway, I hope you got some value out of this book review from The Power of One More by Ed Mylett. I expect to do more of these in the future. I get distracted with a lot of work and listening to podcasts, but I find that when I sit down and read, there's a lot more to benefit from than just the information you are putting into your system. You actually find some peace and meditation while you're reading, and it gives you a sense of equanimity, which is a term Ed Mylett talks about in this book as well in a separate chapter. But overall, it's a meditative experience while making you more intelligent. Thank you all for listening today. Please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, wherever you watch it or listen to it. And check out the Instagram pages, Nichols and Dimez, and Nichols and Dimez Show for the podcast page. Have an awesome week, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Nichols and Dimez Show. Please hit the subscribe button on YouTube and follow my Instagram page at Nichols and Dimez. The podcast Instagram page is at Nichols and Dimez Show. And please like any of the videos you come across on either platform and leave a comment, leave feedback. It helps me to improve and innovate and to continue to scale and bring more interesting guests to the Nichols and Dimez Show. Thank you all for the support, and we'll see you next time.